Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Classic Football Review podcast here on Wearing Number 10. Twitch.tv/Wearing Number 10 is where we are live. After this as is done, we'll be posting this to our YouTube channel, Wearing Number 10. We'll also be putting it on Spotify too. Now, if you saw or listened to the show last week, you heard me say that I'm trying to get it on Spotify. Well, I was successful in that. So we're now on Spotify. Just search Classic Football Review podcast and you should be able to find us. We are covering another doozy on the show this week. Last week, we looked at the 2005 Champions League final. It's up there for not just the greatest Champions League final of all time, but the greatest comeback of all time. And today we look at another game that is a real strong contender for both of those accolades. It's the 1999 Champions League final. Manchester United versus Bayern Munich from the 26th of May, 1999 at the Nou Camp in Barcelona. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined this week by a man who writes for Balls.ie and a friend of mine, Eoin Harrington. Eoin, how are you doing today?
I'm not too bad, Sean. I'm not too bad. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. So I know this is a game that you look back on fondly as a Manchester United fan. It is a game that ensures that the legacy of a certain man will be enshrined in the club forever, no matter what he does in the future. And we will cover that later on in the show. But we need to talk about the match first. Obviously, this is the culmination of United's bid for the treble. They had won the Premier League 10 days before this and the FA Cup 3 days before this with a pretty comfortable 2-0 win over Newcastle. But Europe was always the holy grail. Roy Keane said in his book that it was always the trophy that the manager wanted most. In signing him, Ferguson said to Keane, "Without you, we're going to dominate the Premier League. That's a given. With you, we can dominate in Europe." And kind of ironic, actually, that one of the big talking points before the game was the fact that Roy Keane wouldn't be playing in this final, and neither would Paul Scholes, because they'd both picked up yellow cards in Italy.
Yeah, I mean, that Roy Keane thing is so interesting because I think what most people would remember of Roy Keane from that year is just how good he was in the semi-final against Juventus. Like, I think just about anyone would tell you that's one of the all-time great Champions League performances is Roy Keane tearing apart that Juventus team. That was a team that had Zidane and Inzaghi and all of these incredible players. But he, in getting booked for the final, it seems like he is the one who thinks the most about that tarnishing his legacy. I think most people would say that he contributed so much to that year. And the same with Scholes, like scoring the winner in the quarterfinal against Inter. They both were such huge parts of United getting to the final. I don't think they would have won the Champions League in 99 without either of them. And yet Keane also in both of his books talks about how he doesn't really see himself as a Champions League winner because he didn't play in the final.
I remember the Keane and Vieira Best of Enemies documentary that he said he'd eased off on it. But his main regret was some of the other finals that they should have got to. They came very close in 97. They were knocked out by Borussia Dortmund, managed by Ottmar Hitzfeld, who was Alex Ferguson's counterpart tonight, and leading a Bayern team that were on a treble hunt of their own. They'd wrapped up the Bundesliga fairly comfortably, and they were looking ahead to a German Cup final against Werder Bremen a couple of weeks after this. And they certainly had the easier road. As I said, they already had the German title wrapped up, whereas United's went to the wire. They had to come from behind to beat Spurs to make sure that the title was theirs and not Arsenal's. And they had to play 35 matches to Bayern's 23 since they played each other in the group stage. They were actually in the group together. Both games ended in draws. And United, it is really kind of a marathon season for them because there's this Champions League qualification campaign started for them before the Premier League season did. They had to get through a Polish side, LKS Lodz, or it's pronounced something really weird. I don't speak Polish. But it's, even going into it, is probably the biggest game in the history of the club. Certainly the biggest for over 30 years. Looking at the teams, as we've mentioned, Keane and Scholes were out. So in the middle of the park for United was Nicky Butt, who was a regular centre midfielder, and David Beckham. Now, Beckham obviously played on the right. He was pretty instrumental from set pieces. He scored a crucial goal for United in the FA Cup semi-final against Arsenal. He also teed up a lot of Dwight York's goals in Europe on the way to the final. And the reason that he was put in this spot was, if apparently it's his favorite position, but it's quite a noble choice from Alex Ferguson that might well have backfired. He said what made him put Beckham in the middle rather than Giggs was that a high standard of passing in the center midfield was a hallmark of Man United's play, which fair enough, that's noble and all, but Giggs actually took his berth on the right wing, and considering he's a left-footed player, it was a pretty risky move by Alex Ferguson.
Yeah, all of what I'm saying on this match, of course, comes with the caveat that this match and this whole season happened about 3 weeks before I was actually born. But I've gone back and I've seen this match, I'd say about 5 or 6 times, and I've watched so much this season. And I think one of the things about 99 that maybe people of our generation don't realize, or people tend to forget, is just how good David Beckham was that year. I think at the end of 1999, the calendar year, he finished 2nd or 3rd in the Ballon d'Or. I think people of our generation would have this image of Beckham being a good footballer who then became a bigger celebrity. But the reality is he was one of the best footballers in the world. And you could watch highlight reels of David Beckham's passing for hours on end and just not get bored. He played the ball like so few people have for United. And there's that part of me that wonders, he came through the class of 92 with Paul Scholes. I wonder if Scholes hadn't been in that class of 92, maybe Beckham would have been the one to come into the midfield, you know? Like that's one of the interesting questions you have. Would we know David Beckham, the winger, if it wasn't for that? With regards to Giggs, I mean, Giggs did not have a good game in this final. He's almost anonymous the whole way through the game. And this was only a few weeks after his incredible goal in the semi-final against Arsenal. But he didn't offer a huge amount of the game. Now, it comes with the caveat, of course, that he was involved in one of the goals, so can't really argue with that. But in open play, you're right. I don't know how well the right wing ever suited Giggs. And towards the end of his career, when he was losing the legs a bit, and he was kind of the senior member of the squad, he ended up transitioning into that midfield role. And you could argue that Ferguson's insistence on playing him in the midfield damaged United in future finals as well. So I don't know, with Giggs, you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't with putting him in midfield.
Looking at the Bayern Munich team, they had 10 Germans in the starting lineup, only 3 non-Germans in the entire squad. Interestingly enough, one of those non-Germans is actually Ali Daei from Iran, who until recently held the record for the most goals scored by an international. That was recently broken by Cristiano Ronaldo against Ireland. Bayern were going through a bit of a European drought of their own. They hadn't won it in 23 years, ever since they'd done 3 in a row from 1974 to 1976. And they certainly got off to the better start. They got the first goal after just 6 minutes. It was a tame foul for a free kick, and it was an even tamer goal, I think. Carsten Janker, their striker, leaned into Ronnie Johnson, felt the contact, went over. And then Mario Basler, who is actually the commentator for this, Clive Tilsley, again, as it was in the 2005 final. He had a lot of pearls of wisdom. He said of Basler, his favorite woman is the queen and his hobby is sleeping. So he was a bit like, reminds me of a Gaza or a Balotelli-esque figure, but like Gaza and Balotelli, he was effective on the pitch, and he found the modicum of space that was made available in the wall and managed to find the net.
Yeah, I mean, that goal, it was Peter Schmeichel's last game for Man United. I don't think Schmeichel covers himself in glory with that goal at all. I think he really gets caught out a lot by it's very effective from Basler to see that space and to take advantage of it, but it really kind of screams to me of Schmeichel not reading that even as a possibility, when if you're watching it and you look at the way it's set up, that's the place Basler is always going to put that ball. He's always going to try and curl it around that wall if he's going for goal. But yeah, the thing with that goal as well is like Bayern just had so much energy after that. And for a good 10 minutes of that match afterwards, United looked quite deflated. I suppose as you would be after playing Spurs in a very tough game to win the league 10 days earlier, playing Newcastle in an FA Cup final the next weekend, and then playing another game of Champions League final. Like, that's just such a tough run of games. And like you say, Bayern had everything wrapped up. So definitely early on, especially with Basler, there's just so much more energy to Bayern's play. And the thing that's always stood out to me about that is that is the Schmeichel goalkeeping. I just if you read that a bit better, you maybe don't even get the story of the comeback in this match. It's interesting.
You mentioned earlier that you've watched this game about 5 or 6 times, and to be honest with you, I watched the entire thing in preparation for this show, and obviously I don't know how you make it through the first half, because it is quite a boring game of football, to be honest, because Bayern were definitely on top, but they seemed quite content, and this obviously became a lot more noticeable as the game went on, even into the second half, that they were trying to hold on to what they had. They had Lothar Matthäus as their sweeper. When you look at the formation that Bayern were set out with, he's almost on top of the goalkeeper. And also, I mean, yeah, maybe it is helped by the fact that United were trying to get used to this new midfield with Beckham in the middle and Giggs out on the right. But United were creating, as Clive Tilsley said, openings more than chances. They had a couple of half opportunities. Giggs kept shooting from the edge of the box. Cole had the ball at his feet, but was immediately surrounded by 4 or 5 German midfielders. Beckham had a trademark free kick opportunity that he pulled wide. Ferguson, in his first book, talked about how part of the somewhat lackluster first half performance was not just that they'd had a massive schedule, but this was an occasion unlike any other. European Cup final, the first in so many years, the treble on the line. It just wasn't a good first half, and it was kind of exemplified by a moment at near the end of the first half where Stam nearly got pickpocketed, and it's just one of those defensive mistakes that, as a United fan, it will probably put your heart in your throat. But they managed to get to halftime at 1-0 down, because Bayern weren't really seizing the initiative either, and United did start to go through the gears at the beginning of the second half. Not the beginning of the second half, but 10 minutes in. If it seems like we've skimmed through the first half, it's kind of because there really isn't much going on. But the first big chance of the second half fell to Jesper Blomqvist, and it was a big chance. It's the sort of chance that kind of invigorates an entire team.
Yeah. And Blomqvist is interesting. He kind of strikes me as the equivalent as maybe Eoin Hargreaves in 2008 as the player you might forget almost in this team. Because Beckham coming into midfield opened up another spot on the wing for someone like Blomqvist to come in. And he is the one who injects that life into the game in the second half, because this was a season where Cole and York, we've seen so many amazing strike duos over the year. So few have come even close to the level of Dwight York and Andy Cole in 99. And even just earlier that year in the new camp against Barcelona, they had one of the best Champions League goals ever, where they're zipping it through and they're finding space where there's no space. And there's kind of a running theme in this match that they keep finding space and they just can't do anything with it. Whereas Blomqvist at the start of the second half really starts to exploit that space a bit more. And that chance definitely feels like a kind of light in the touch paper kind of moment where United aren't going away. And it's interesting because one of the things that I have observed about when people are talking about this final is that it was stolen at the death, that Bayern were all over United. I'm not actually sure that's that true. I think the game is very even the whole time. And in the second half, Bayern have more flashpoint chances, but there's just that little bit more of a kick to United, and there's that sense every time they go forward that they're getting closer to a breakthrough. They just seem more dangerous all the time, and I do think Blomqvist does a lot of the heavy lifting in that regard. He not only sets it off, but he's constantly contributing to a lot of great attacking play during the second half.
He certainly had his part to play, but he was ultimately substituted for Teddy Sheringham. And I do remember it caused that chance for Blomqvist caused a lift in the players, but it caused a lift in the fans as well. We talked about the Liverpool fans in the 2005 final on last week's show, how once they got the first goal and then they immediately won the ball back, it was just a wall of noise. And when you're in the new camp, that's not such a big stadium, but also a really tall stadium, with the stands just seem to be on top of each other. That wall of noise must just be really, really quite intimidating if you're facing into the opposition fans. Although they did start singing "Football's Coming Home" at one point, which I found peculiar. Then the chances did start to come. Andy Cole completely fluffed an overhead kick. He had that was a good chance. And then Basler, in keeping with his kind of maverick brand, tried to chip Schmeichel from. He essentially tried to do what David Beckham did when he scored from the halfway line. It didn't quite come off for him, but it was kind of a warning shot that even though United were settling into the game, Bayern were very much still there. And Basler had another great moment, and this was the moment when a lot of people would have said, "Oh, it's just not going to be United's night because these chances are just coming for Bayern, even when they're not quite at their best." Basler had a brilliant run just where he skipped around Beckham and surged forward, laid it off to Mehmet Scholl, who had a brilliant opportunity. Well, not a brilliant opportunity, but he created a brilliant opportunity for himself that came off the post, and that chip over Schmeichel. Looking back on it, I could watch that back 100 times, and every time I think that Schmeichel is beaten.
Yeah, and it's one of those when you're saying that people would have thought it wouldn't be United's night. Like that's completely true. You're starting to see Bayern creating big chances and hitting the woodwork and that, but there must be a part of you when you're a player that thinks at that stage as well that like maybe that's a sign that is your night. You know, that a player can go on a brilliant run and lay it off to a teammate and they create a chance out of nothing and your goalkeeper looks beaten and through some miraculous twist it hits the post and bounces straight back out. There must be a part of you as a player that thinks, okay, we got away with one there. Maybe something's working for us, or maybe it's just not going to click for them and we just have to start creating those chances ourselves and it's going to click for us. Because I feel I've heard maybe people like Schmeichel talking on stuff like that they never once thought it was going to be Bayern's night. And there's a lot of quotes from Tilsley in commentary where there's this sense that Bayern are giving everything they've got at that stage. Like that's the best they can create. Whereas United are constantly on the cusp of creating something. And it feels the whole time like there's something coming from United. And just those little chances, they're just not quite going Bayern's way the whole way through the second half.
Well,
I'm
if they
trying
thought
not to say all of this with a gleeful smile on my face, but
if they thought it might have been their night, then they must have known after Janker hit the bar. He basically tried an overhead kick from the penalty spot, and how you hit the bar from there, I have no idea. But it felt from that moment on that came in the 83rd minute, and I knew those two chances came, but I didn't realize that they were so late in the game. But it did feel like two things happened. First, United thought, okay, they've come incredibly close twice now. We've no more time to waste. We have to just go for the jugular now. And on the other hand, Bayern, it was almost like, okay, we've had our two best chances. We're not going to get another goal. There's 7 minutes left. We can hold on to what we have here. And Ollie Solskjaer had come on for Andy Cole and Tilsley. There's so many prophetic things he says at the beginning of the second half. He says, he talks about Alex Ferguson's commendations, and he said, "Is it going to be Arise Sir Alex after this?" And it looked like it was not going to be. Although once that chance, that overhead kick didn't go for Bayern, the United chances that were coming in a trickle just came in a flood because there were so many of them. I got a list of them here. Sheringham had a header on the same near post that Ollie headed at as soon as he came on. York on the penalty spot. Dwight York was the man for United that season, and he had a chance on the penalty spot with the goal at his mercy. But as my dad would say, he threw both feet at it and went nowhere. But the chances just kept coming and coming and coming. And when it finally came for United, it how best do I put this? Because so much has been written about this, and I'm trying to just collate all the information in my head. It's gone down in history as we almost stole it, but it did feel like that equalizer was very much deserved, that it was an inevitability. It was kind of like we'd had so many chances and Bayern were offering nothing in attack that it was almost going to come for us. That's what United must have been thinking, and it eventually did came, although I mean it was fairly sloppy, but I don't think Sheringham or Giggs or anyone United affiliated would have cared.
And it's funny that probably the best thing Peter Schmeichel did in the whole game as goalkeeper for United is win the ball at that corner. Like he is the one, the big, tall Danish guy in the box. He goes up and causes that nuisance and causes the ball to bounce around a bit. And that's what causes the panic clearance out to Giggs. And then you have the worst shot of Giggs' career, followed by an equally scuffed shot from Sheringham, but he's only standing about 3 yards out, so he can't really miss from there once he just gets it on target.
I'd say United fans had their heart in their mouth as well for offside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I don't know, with VAR nowadays, you'd probably be looking at it for about 3 or 4 minutes trying to figure it out. But yeah, there is a certain part of that, and I mean, I think there's so many great lines from this night, as you say, from Clyde Tilsley. My personal favorite is, can Manchester United score? They always score, because there was an element of that. You know, you're saying about Solskjaer coming on. They did the exact same thing in the FA Cup against Liverpool. They were losing 1-0 in injury time, and then 2 goals in injury time, including the winner from Solskjaer, and that's the game, you know.
Quite an interesting line I remember from this, actually, is the first thing Clive says after the goal goes in is, name on the trophy. Now, it's kind of an urban legend that they'd already started to carve Bayern's name on the trophy and their ribbons were already on the trophy. But weird thing about that is, one, they never alluded to that on commentary. And 2, how could you possibly think that with the multitude of chances that United had to that point? I mean, I remember in 2014 in the final, Real and Atletico, and Real got their equalizer at a similar time to when Sheringham got his. Now, they didn't win the game in normal time; they won it in extra time. But it seemed quite foolhardy on the part of the UEFA officials to think that the game was over at that point.
Especially with the way it was going. Like, there's so many great chances, like the one for York, and then Solskjaer has one as well. And I think at one stage even Gary Neville pops up in the box, which only happened about once every 4 years during his career. So like, United, the pressure was just coming and it was endless. And there is that sense that there's another goal in the game, whether it's a Bayern goal or a United goal. Maybe it depends on your reading of the game, but there's never a sense that the game is finished at 1-0. There's definitely another goal coming the whole time. And yeah, I mean, Sheringham, you kind of forget that Sheringham was already in his 30s at that stage, because he lasted for nearly another 10 years. That you'd almost think that was his youth, because he had another 10 years, but he's already in his 30s. He's already such an experienced striker. And I remember reading there were a lot of questions about when United signed him, about whether they needed him or where he was going to fit or what he was going to do. I mean, a goal and an assist in the Champions League final to win it, you can't really argue with that.
And one thing that I find pretty amazing, which is that we know that Bayern were hanging on to what they had, but it seemed like they actually thought that the game was wrapped up, because at that point they'd taken off Lothar Matthäus, who was their main man. They'd taken off the goal scorer Mario Basler, and Alex Ferguson actually theorizes that if that Matthäus was still on, they would have lost that game, because the guy who came on from Torsten Fink was the guy who tried to make the clearance, but the ball fell to Ryan Giggs. And if it was Matthäus, it would have been a Beckenbauer-esque, very smooth clearance away, and maybe another chance wouldn't have fallen to them. But yeah, it's a massive oversight, really, because at this stage we were going into extra time, and to think that the idea that Bayern would have held on for 30 minutes without Matthäus and Basler and all these guys that were kind of the nucleus of their team, and having just felt that gut punch of losing their lead that they thought they couldn't possibly lose.
Yeah,
I don't think they would have lasted very long in extra time at all. Of course, and that was a time when golden goal was still a thing. But you know, a golden goal came, and it wasn't needed in extra time, because Solskjaer was actually the one who won the corner. Some very tricky play up against Kufur, their defender, and I think the only non-German in the starting lineup. And it was Kufur that was almost to blame for this goal going in, because as the cross came in from the corner even came in from Beckham, it was nicked on by Sheringham, and Kufur, who had his hand on Solskjaer's jersey, was just caught ball watching, let go of Solskjaer's jersey, and took a step towards Sheringham, and that left Solskjaer in a space to use his long toe almost to poke it into the net. And there's so many kind of incredible images. There's that weird flip that Peter Schmeichel did, the knee slide by Solskjaer, who, yeah, that's kind of the go-to football celebration. God knows what was going through his head, so I'll just do a knee slide. The reaction of the bench, where Phil Neville realizes what's happened about a second before anyone else. He's off sprinting towards the pylon before anyone's even moved. And I wonder what Clive Tilsley must have been thinking, because he'd been so prophetic leading up to the corner. To the corner before the goal that won it, he was saying, you have to feel this is their year. But after the ball does go in, there's an even longer pause than the one that came after they scored the first goal. And I wonder what goes through a commentator's head when they're in that situation. Martin Tyler actually said, when he was talking about commentating the Man City QPR game where Aguero won it in the last moments, was that he kind of purposefully kept silent because the pictures told the story, but also it was the noisiest thing he'd ever heard in a football ground. And not only the crowd, but also he had the crowd noise coming through his headphones. And yeah, when you got a stadium as big as the Nou Camp, that noise must have been deafening. The referee described it as like a lion's roar. And the referee kind of had the unenviable task of having to tell the Bayern Munich players that they had to get up off the ground and continue the game if they could.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to dissect with that goal. Clive Tilsley has said something along those lines of sometimes the most important thing is to not say anything. Like, that can be the best thing you can say in a big moment as a commentator, and he nails that in the aftermath of that goal. I'll never forget, I remember hearing a quote from Solskjaer a few years ago where he was interviewed about that match, and he said he'd been dreaming about playing in a European Cup final his whole life, and he was kind of raging that he only got on in the 81st minute. He's like, I'm only going to get 10 minutes of a European Cup final. And Sheringham equalizes, and he's like, oh, great, I'm going to get another half hour. And he's like, and then I fucking ruined my whole dream of getting another half hour of a European Cup final by scoring again. Yeah, the images of that goal are so evocative. Like the one from behind the goal is my personal favorite, of everyone looking in the same direction towards the corner of the goal. But the images of the immediate aftermath of it as well, of all of the Bayern players just having to get up and go again, it's just almost hard to watch. I think it's Kufur who just collapses on the ground while the game is going on and just cannot keep playing, just because they're so devastated. It's extraordinary. It's a little bit evocative of the scenes on Sunday with Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton in the Formula One. It's literally just being stolen at the death after leading for so long from the very start, and then suddenly just to have it completely reversed in the space of, I don't think there's more than about 90 seconds between the two goals. It's kind of mind-boggling to think of winning a game for 90 minutes and then having it not only equalized but overturned in the space of a minute and a half. It would be such a crushing thing to go through on the pitch.
Alex Ferguson said that after the first goal, it looked like they were coming away from a plane crash, the Bayern players, and the second one, we talked a lot about iconic imagery. The first camera cut after the goal goes in is Solskjaer's knee slide. The second is Schmeichel doing his cartwheel thing. The third is less famous, but almost more reflective of the situation, because the guy who was guarding the post that the ball went into, Michael Tarnat, he's just utter disbelief on his face, and Lothar Matthäus sitting with the rest of the Bayern players on the bench, just sitting there. And the game, there was a little bit of life left in the game. Bayern did have a chance to offer some sort of reply. Effenberg knocked it up the field, but just hacked it clear, and that was it. And the treble was complete. It's something that no English team has ever managed. It was denied from Bayern that day. In the end, it wouldn't have mattered because they went on to lose the German Cup final to Werder Bremen on penalties. I wonder.
A pretty tough week to be a Bayern fan.
I know, right? It's almost incomprehensible to them. I really do wonder how that game sits in the history of Bayern Munich, because we know how it is in United. It's probably the greatest moment in the club's history, but Bayern had that moment taken from them, and maybe it's seen in the same way as the Aguero moment that I mentioned earlier, in that it was a case of kind of they did all they could, and in the end it just, fate wasn't on their side. But I do feel the most sorry for Lothar Matthäus, because that was his last chance to win a European Cup. Bayern would eventually win the tournament in 2001, but he'd already left for America by that point. After the game, Schmeichel was captain in Roy Keane's place. He lifted the trophy. I don't know why Alex Ferguson lifted it with him, but he was entitled to it, I suppose. Although he was going to get knighthood anyway, so it seems greedy. Keane and Scholes were there, and they were kind of in the same boat. And obviously, they were ecstatic that they won, but they didn't really feel like they could join in the celebration because they weren't part of the team that made it happen. Keane wouldn't get a chance to play in another Champions League final. Scholes eventually did in 2008. I think he played the full... No, he didn't play the full 120 minutes, did he?
He came off for Giggs. He was the one who came off for Giggs in extra time. And he also had his nose broken in that match as well. So I don't think Paul Scholes has the fondest memory of Champions League finals. Even though he has 2 medals, I have a feeling he mightn't be the biggest fan, because he went on to lose another 2 as well. So
for the completionists out there, the other 2 players that were in... Well, actually, there were 3. Gary Neville, who I think played in both finals, Ryan Giggs as well. And an unused substitute for United was Wes Brown, who... Him and Jonathan Greening were some of probably the young United prospects who were on the bench. Brown would have a better Champions League final the next time he would play. He would actually set up Ronaldo's goal in normal time. I'm sure that's a game we'll cover on the show in the future. But the aftermath of this, it arguably never got this good again for United. They would continue to dominate in the league, but this crop of players wouldn't get the European Cup back, which is something that Roy Keane really lamented in his first book. They have the opportunity to create a dynasty, or akin to what Liverpool and Bayern did in the 70s and 80s, or even Real Madrid when they won the first 5 Champions Leagues back to back to back to back to back. Bayern would eventually get their treble. They actually got 2 of them. In 2013 they beat Borussia Dortmund in the final. Bayern have just been the scourge of Borussia Dortmund's existence, haven't they? And they most recently did it in 2020, denying PSG their own treble. But it was United's night, and it was Ollie's night, and it cemented his legacy in the club forever, as we mentioned in the beginning of this show. And I guess that brings us to where we are today, because Ollie obviously went on to become the manager of Manchester United. Mm-hmm. And as a United fan, what do you think his legacy is as the manager of the club?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was always a very big fan of Solskjaer as manager. I really wanted it to succeed. I thought right up until almost the very end of last year that it was going to succeed. And this summer, I mean, the talent arriving, Sancho and Varane, and that's not even mentioning Cristiano Ronaldo returning. I think this match offers an interesting parallel, I think, and a nice way of summarizing United under Solskjaer as a manager. You know, when the 99 final came around, United had played in 2 European finals previously. They won the European Cup in 68 and they won the Cup Winners' Cup in 91. They'd never lost a final. And there's that kind of feeling the whole way through the match that even in the Clyde Tilsey commentary that, you know, like, United will win this. United win European games. Like they do well in Europe. And the same in 2008. And since then, they've lost 3 finals. So I think when you look at where United were in 99, that was where that team were always going to peak. And I don't know if we've ever seen a team have a better season in England than 99, you know, because it's easy to forget that in the FA Cup, United had to knock out Liverpool and Chelsea and Arsenal and Newcastle. And in the Champions League, they came up against Bayern and Barcelona and possibly the greatest ever Inter Milan and Juventus teams. And then the final, like they faced the toughest opposition at just about every corner and overcame it. But that was because that team had been building for 3 or 4 years, and it felt like that was their end point almost, or where they were destined to end up. For Solskjaer as a manager, it's funny because I think it's the same as a player. I think he's going to be remembered for one game in particular, and I think that will be the Villarreal final last year. I think that for me was the first point where I thought maybe this guy is not going to lead it. You know, like this was a United team with the best midfielder in Europe last year in Bruno Fernandes, and with informed players like Luke Shaw, Marcus Rashford, and Edinson Cavani up against a team that finished 7th in Spain with only 2 or 3 big names at a stretch. And the lack of ability to break them down and losing that game on penalties, I feel will be remembered as the point where Solskjaer reached his peak, if that makes sense. Or certainly where Solskjaer's United team reached their peak, because this was the 2nd year in a row they were the best team left in the Europa League, which they shouldn't have even been in the first place. And they were the best team left in the competition and couldn't win it. I have to say I was sad when he was sacked. Like I've comfortably had my favourite times as a United fan since Ferguson left while Solskjaer was manager. There's very few things as a United fan that have compared to the Derby wins over City, or the FA Cup win over Liverpool, or the wins over PSG. The first one in Paris with Marcus Rashford's penalty is almost on the level of something like a final win. And you have so many smaller moments as well, like the return of Ronaldo, and so many big wins along the way. It's hard to say what his lasting legacy will be, because those two are conflicting all the time. I think he leaves the club in a better place than where he found it. I think the squad is better. I think the mood around the club is better. I think the groundwork is there for United to go on to success now, which I couldn't say when Moyes or Van Gaal or Mourinho left. I think they left the club in worse states than they found it. But there is that crippling feeling that he had the squad there to win things, to win a cup or to win a Europa League, and he didn't. And I guess for Ollie, maybe the defining part of his legacy is that it's good that he has this as a player. I don't think he was ever going to top the heights of his playing career. I think if you ask anyone to top a injury time winner in a Champions League final, it's pretty hard to top that as an experience. But I think he can be proud of the job he did. I think the fans are appreciative of him, and I think with time he'll be remembered well, especially if this United team kicks on to success. If they win something this year, they're not going to win the Premier League, but if they win an FA Cup or a League Cup, or Champions League is a weird tournament these days, you wouldn't rule it out the way it's gone the last few years. I think his time in charge will be remembered a bit as a fond time, and I hope it is, because I think he was generally a good manager who, like I say, leaves the club in a better place than he found it.
Well, like I said, he'll always have the 1999 Champions League final, and Solskjaer 20 jerseys will be sold in the United Superstore forever because of it.
I have mine here. I have a Solskjaer 20 jersey that I bought a year or two ago, and it's been on the shelf now for a few weeks, but I'm sure it'll be cracked out again in a few weeks' time when the dust has settled on it all.
So that was the 1999 Champions League final. Another doozy, really, and well worthy of being called a classic football match. Eoin, your Manchester United expertise, your general expertise, very much appreciated. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me on, Sean. It's great crack. I always enjoy reliving this game. So thank you very much. And hope to be back on again sometime.
We certainly hope to have you. This has been the Classic Football Review podcast for Wearing Number 10. This show will be going up on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is Wearing Number 10. It'll also be going on Spotify, Wearing Number 10, or you can search Classic Football Review and it'll almost certainly come up. Twitter and Instagram is both at Wearing Number 10. Stay tuned to those, as we'll be announcing the next Classic Football Review podcast there. Until then, I've been Sean Breslin with Eoin Harrington. Thanks very much for watching and or listening, and we'll see you next time.